WF Sports, man. It's Lamont, man. We back with another video today. Today we're gonna be doing a reaction to another YouTuber. Before we get into the video, make sure you guys subscribe and hit that notification bell. Again, that's the only way. Again, when we put out these videos, it's the only way you can stay in touch with anything that we drop. So make sure you subscribe, hit that notification bell to stay locked in. Again, the next grind to 100K. I mean, from where we're at now, it looks like a large leap, but again, it's something that I feel is very possible, especially with the growth that we've had over the last couple of months. So today, man, we're gonna be doing a reaction video. I came across this video, it was on my feed today, and the title of it caught my attention. This is a guy that I've actually debated before, and he's one of the guys that I feel is one of those 90s basketball lovers. He feels that 90s basketball could do no wrong, and it was essentially the perfect era of basketball. And again, I don't blame him for that. You know, a lot of people are going to stick up for their own eras just because of the nostalgia factor involved. You don't want to let it go, and you really don't want to see other guys usurp what your era actually did. So, you know, but the truth of the matter is that as basketball evolves, players are most definitely getting bigger, faster, and stronger. And so the title of his video is Shannon Sharpe's Bigger, Faster, Stronger line is a lie. So I just want to kind of hear him out. Now I've listened to snippets of it before, so I already know how I'm going to break this down, and then we'll go ahead and discuss later how his take on this is based on a false premise. So he's coming at this in the wrong angle. And again, this is something that's very commonly found in the arguments of 90s basketball minds. Again, their arguments are extremely flawed, but we're going to hear him out. I want you guys to hear what he has to say. So we're going to play snippets here and there of what he has to say. And then and then after we hear what he has to say, we'll go ahead and break it down with the facts of the matter, because that's what we do here at FYF Sports. We like breaking down the facts. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start it out. And this is his video. We're going to start it out at about a 4-minute mark. And then we'll just go ahead and hear what he has to say.
Was the period of time between 2010 and 2014. And since then, players have actually been getting smaller. Why? Maybe because of their style of play. Centers aren't as important anymore. 2013-14, the average height was 6'7", weight 223. The next year, 2014-2015, height 6'7", weight 222 pounds. 2015-2016, 6'7", 221 pounds. 2016-2017, the height 6'7", weight 220 pounds. So statistically, they've been getting smaller and smaller. 2017-2018, the average height and weight 6'7", 219. Last year, the average height dropped 6'6", 217. This year, 6'6", 216, which is the smallest height-wise that we've been since 1979-1980. And the lowest weight it's been since 1998-99. So because of small ball, because of the emphasis on three-pointers,
I just got to pause it right there, man. I got to pause it right there, man, because, again, this is the flawed logic. So, again, people like to use the term bigger, faster, stronger. That's commonly used to describe this era of basketball as compared to primarily the 90s era of basketball. Now, he's taking this particular statement, bigger, faster, stronger, and he's acting as if that specifically means the height and weight of players. This statement does not necessarily mean the height and weight of players, because, and I'll show you the stats later, because across the board since 1990, the height and weight of players from point guards to centers has essentially been the same for all categories. So if we look at the average heights of point guards, shooting guards, small forwards, and centers since 1990, these numbers have been essentially exactly the same for the last 30 years, if not more. So when we're saying bigger, faster, stronger, we're not talking about necessarily just the height and the weight of each individual player, because as it correlates to basketball, those numbers are always going to be about the same. Point guards are usually going to be smaller than shooting guards. Shooting guards are usually going to be smaller than small forwards. Small forwards are usually smaller than power forwards, and power forwards are usually smaller than centers. That is not necessarily going to change, and it hasn't changed over the last 40 years. So for him to just start throwing out random numbers with regards to heights, what he's trying to do, he's trying to divert from the true facts, the true issue at hand. That's trying that when people say bigger, faster, stronger, it has a different meaning. It has a different connotation that only basketball minds can really understand. And so what Two Raw right here is basically displaying right here, he's basically displaying his lack of basketball knowledge. Because again, just like Gideon and just like a lot of these other guys, they go straight to Google and they turn into Google warriors when somebody uses a line, bigger, faster, and stronger, to describe this era as compared to 90s basketball. But again, that's just a small breakdown of where the flaw is in his argument. I'll break that down later. But we'll hear him out just a little bit more. But again, he's starting his argument off with what you call is just fallacies. These things, he's trying to compare this statement to something that has nothing to do with what Shannon Sharpe was even talking about, or people who say whenever they say bigger, faster, and stronger to describe this era as compared to the 90s, it does not mean what he's talking about. So we're going to go ahead and play a little bit more what he has to say, and then after he's done talking, we're just going to get straight to it. We're going to get to debunking everything that he said. We're going to debunk it down step by step, and then I'm going to explain to you what bigger, faster, stronger actually means, and why Shannon Sharpe was right, and why a lot of even 90s players will admit that this era is bigger, faster, and stronger.
Is that players today are more athletic. I know where you're getting at with that one, but to me, the most athletic era was the late 90s into the 2000s, when being athletic was an advantage because defenses still hadn't been handcuffed. You needed guys that had the extra speed and extra first step to be able to get by people, to get to the basket, to be able to get through the little seams, because defenses still were, effective then. So, when I think of the 2000s, I think of Tracy McGrady, I think of Vince Carter. Think of the best players. Think of the best players back then. They weren't shooters. They were the more athletic slashers. The Tracy McGrady's, the Vince Carters, the Kobe Bryants, the Allen Iversons, the Desmond Masons, the Jason Richardsons, the Sean Marions, the young LeBron James. They wasn't focusing on shooting threes. Those were guys that were getting to the basket and slamming it on the bigs. So don't give me this bullshit about today's players are more athletic than ever before. They're not. The stars of today are athletic to a great extent, yes. But James Harden, look at his game. Does it really scream out he can dunk over four people? Steph Curry, no. Klay Thompson, no. Durant's great. Durant's spectacular. But he's not the most athletic guy I've ever seen before play. He's one of the most skilled. He's one of the greatest scorers ever. But I'm talking about guys that have 40-inch vertical leaps. And, Antonio McDyess. Think about it. All the great players at that time.
All right, you guys, man. Again, I haven't, it gets to a point where once I start hearing the nonsense for too long, once I start hearing the narrative that he's trying to push, where his premise where he's trying to come from, he's basically saying that this era of basketball, when he says small ball, he's saying small ball means they're smaller basketball players. All right, that's what he's basically trying to say. He's trying to say that when we say bigger, faster, and stronger, it simply directly correlates to a player's height and weight and how high they can jump, and that's 100% false. So remember, we like to go to the drawing board to debunk people. Again, because he's pushing a very false narrative that has nothing to do with what bigger, faster, stronger actually means. So we're just going to get to the debunking process right here. Average player height per position from 1952 to 2018. So as you can see here, we got point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, and center. And so what the first thing what I want to show you, so when we say that this era is bigger, faster, and stronger, well, we're not simply stating that. We don't simply mean that players are just taller and bigger than everybody else. That's not the definition of bigger, faster, stronger. And that's proven in the fact by just simply looking at this chart. If you simply look at this chart, again, as I already told you guys, and this starts from 2017, 2018, and it's consistent with 2019 and 2020. If we go down this chart, and as we go down, you'll see that the heights per position don't necessarily change much. They may change an inch or two and maybe go up or down slightly, but again, these are not great leaps. All right, so these heights across the board per position, as you can see, 6'11" since 1990, and I'll scroll all the way down to 1990. 6'11" has been the average height of a center since 1990, and it's been 6'11" all the way up to 2020. That's the average height of every center in the NBA. So for him to say that small ball is affecting the size of centers, no, it's not. Centers will always be the biggest players on the court. The average height of a power forward is 6'9". The average height of a small forward is 6'7". The average height of shooting guards has been 6'4" to 6'5". Average height of point guards has been right around 6'1". These numbers have been very consistent since 1990. This is for like the last 30 years. These 30, 40 years, these numbers have not necessarily changed, as you guys can see. So when we say bigger, faster, stronger, now because he's tried to use the logical fallacy that when we say bigger, faster, stronger, we are simply meaning that players are taller, players are heavier, players are just stronger, bench pressing more. No, that's not what we mean. That's not what we mean by a long shot. This is where I'm going to debunk it. Now I'm going to break it. So now when we say bigger, faster, stronger, we know that the average NBA player height since 1990 has been essentially the same since 1990. So what do we mean when we say bigger, faster, stronger? I'll go ahead and break that down to you right now. First up, as you can see here, I got Lebron James. LeBron James, 6'9", 250, physical specimen. He's fast as any guard in the NBA. He's as strong as any center in the NBA. He can guard positions 1 through 5. He's one of the most athletic players that we've seen in NBA history. So what makes LeBron James bigger, faster, and stronger as compared to the 90s? Well, when we look at his prototypical build at 6'9", as we saw on the previous chart, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and put the previous chart right here with the heights right here below so we can correlate that with the players that we see. All right, so as you guys can see, and I got the chart now here right now, just wanted to make sure we can correlate this chart to the players that I'm about to mention. As we can see here, according to this particular chart. All right, so LeBron James at 6'9", 250. Typically, and even in the 90s, his normal position, if he were to play in the 90s, he would be a power forward. What position does LeBron James play in the NBA today? What positions can he play? Well, he's known as a point forward. He's currently the point guard of the Los Angeles Lakers. He can play shooting guard. He can play small forward. He can play power forward. And we've seen him in this league actually play center in certain occasions. This man can play 1 through 5 on the court. All right, he's just as fast as any point guard. He can do everything that a point guard does. He has the court vision that all point guards do. He can shoot the ball. So he can shoot the ball better than most power forwards in the 90s. He can handle the ball better than all power forwards of the 90s. His IQ and court vision is better than every single power forward of the 90s. His athleticism far usurps any of the power forwards of the 90s. So again, when we say bigger, faster, stronger, it correlates to the natural position you would have played back in especially the 90s. In the 90s, we had guys like Derek Coleman. Derek Coleman was limited to the post. Why was Derek Coleman limited to the post? Because of his inability to move on the perimeter. He could not guard guards. He cannot be a guard. He cannot be a shooting guard. He could not shoot the ball with that type of range. He did not have that type of basketball IQ. He did not have that type of athleticism. Even if we compare him to one of the greats of the 90s, Charles Barkley. Charles Barkley was primarily an interior player. All right, an interior player. We did not see Charles Barkley running all over the court, doing the things that LeBron James does, and then doing them for the amount of time that LeBron James has done them. This man is an athletic freak of nature. That's what he is. So as compared to the 90s, LeBron James is the premier definition of being bigger, faster, and stronger than any other power forward in the game. It's not just about your size. And again, with LeBron James, he has an elite size. It's not just about his size. It's primarily about if we plug you into the 90s, if we put LeBron James as a point guard in the 90s, he would essentially run over all of the small point guards in the 90s. Especially when we have guards like Muggsy Bogues, when we have guards, tiny guards like John Stockton, tiny guards like Rod Strickland and Tim Hardaway. Could they guard? If we put LeBron James at the position that he plays in this era, point guard, if we put him into the 90s, could those guys defend him? No, not by a long shot. And the power forwards of that era were not fast enough, we're not strong enough, we're not agile or athletic enough to guard him at the point guard position, which is why he's a matchup nightmare. So when we say bigger, faster, and stronger, it correlates to your position and how unnatural all his gifts make him one of the most unnatural players in the NBA because he can do so much on the basketball court. That's what we mean by bigger, faster, and stronger. And we'll go break it down as it correlates into other players. If we look at Giannis Antetokounmpo, he's probably not just going to be the league MVP this year. He's probably going to be the defensive player of the year. We're talking about a 7-foot small forward. All right. If you're 7 foot in the 1990s, you're automatically going to be put at center. Why were centers in the 1990s? Why were 7-foot centers in the paint all the time? Because unless you were Hakeem Olajuwon, you did not have the foot speed to play on the perimeter. You did not have the foot speed to guard on the perimeter. You didn't have the handle to be a guard. You didn't have a handle to push the ball up the court. You didn't have a jump shot to be able to shoot threes. This man, Giannis Antetokounmpo, when I say he's bigger, faster, and stronger, what is his position right now in the NBA? His position right now in the NBA is small forward. So if we look at our chart, the average height of a small forward in the 90s was right at 6'7". All right, Giannis Antetokounmpo is 7 feet tall as a small forward. Giannis, he's 7 feet tall as a small forward that can be the point guard. All right, that can be your small forward. That's going to be a matchup nightmare. The man can guard 1 through 5. We've seen him defend centers. We've seen him defend power forwards. We've seen him defend small forwards, shooting guards, and point guards, which is why he'll probably be defensive player of the year this year because of how elite he is guarding every position on the court. Now, small forwards in the 90s, were they able to do that? When we look at small forwards of the 90s, were they able to guard the same way Giannis Antetokounmpo was able to guard? When we look at even one of the greatest of all time, Larry Bird, one of the greatest small forwards of all time, would he be able to guard Giannis Antetokounmpo? That would be a matchup nightmare for Larry Bird. Larry Bird did not have the speed, the quickness, the height, anything. So again, when we say bigger, faster, stronger, it correlates to your position and how unnaturally bigger, faster, and strong you are as it relates to your particular position. And as you can see in the NBA today, this is becoming more and more and more common across all positions. You find players like Giannis being bigger, faster, and stronger at that, it's not normal to see 7 foot small forwards in NBA with a handle, with the ability to score, with the ability to face up and attack the rim, with the ability to blow past even the fastest guards in the NBA, with the ability to finish over even the most athletic and biggest centers in the NBA. We did not see that type of speed, quickness, agility in the NBA in the 90s. So let's stop acting like we don't know what bigger, faster, and stronger actually means. It correlates to your position. And again, if we plug him into the 90s, he would dominate every single small forward of the 90s, primarily because he's a 7 foot matchup nightmare. Next up, man, we got Kevin Durant. And look, the man don't even fit on the screen. The man doesn't even fit on the screen, you guys. All right, we got Kevin Durant. All right, we're talking about another 7 foot small forward. And what makes him even more unique with regards to Giannis Antetokounmpo is this man offensively can play the point. He can play the 2. He can play the 3. He can play the 4. And we've seen him guard the 5 all the time. So when he played with the Warriors, when the Warriors went to their small ball lineup, it wasn't necessarily small ball because Kevin Durant, a 7-footer, was playing center. So that's not necessarily small ball. It's because his position is listed as either shooting guard or small forward. And when you put your shooting guard or small forward at the center slot, that's considered small ball. But for teams like the Warriors or any team that has Kevin Durant, it's not really small because Kevin Durant at the end of the day is still a 7-footer. So again, let's use the interpretation of small ball correctly, because small ball, the term simply is about positions, not about height. All right, it's about positions and your ability to play faster. So with Kevin Durant playing center, and because of his ability, his natural position is shooting guard, small forward. Now, if we look at the natural height for small forwards in the 90s, and I'll go ahead and scroll down to the 90s so we don't have any errors here. I'll scroll down to just the 90s right here. The average height across the board for shooting guards in the 90s was about 6'5". Kevin Durant is 7 feet tall. The average height for small forwards was about 6'7". Kevin Durant is 7 feet tall, and the man can also play point. All right, the man can also play point. The average height for point guards in the NBA in the 90s was around 6'1". So when we say bigger, faster, and stronger, Kevin Durant is bigger than every point guard, shooting guard, or small forward in the 90s. He's faster than most point guards, shooting guards, and small forwards. All right, and he's definitely stronger than point guards and shooting guards. Equally as strong as small forwards. The man will be a matchup nightmare for anybody in the 90s. Who could guard Kevin Garnett in the 90s if we plug him into the 90s and we put him at shooting guard? What elite defender? You know, as elite of a defender as Michael Jordan was, there's nothing that Michael Jordan could do to guard Kevin Durant. It's a 7-foot shooting guard. At the peak of his jump shot, he's shooting his jump shot. The peak of his jump shot is around 13 to 14 feet. This essentially means that you cannot really contest this man's jump shot. And when we're dealing with an era in the 90s, where if you are honest about the 90s, you're dealing with a lot of guys who were not as athletically gifted or as in shape as the players of today. They definitely would not be able to contest Kevin Durant's shot. So when we say bigger, faster, stronger, it correlates to your position and how unnatural your size is compared to your position. Kevin Durant's size and skill with regards to his position makes him bigger, faster, and stronger as compared to the 90s, because most 7-footers, like Giannis, if we're natural in the 90s, if you're 7 feet tall, you're a slow center that can barely get up and down the court. Unlike Kevin Durant, he's a center that's lightning quick and that can guard all positions and score anywhere on the court. Same with Giannis. Let's get the true definition of bigger, faster, stronger. Let's not go with what Turaw's trying to lead you to believe is just height across the board. No, that's not what it means. Next up, we got Anthony Davis, y'all. Then we got Anthony Davis again. We got another 7-footer. Anthony Davis is a 7-footer who plays for the Los Angeles Lakers. This man can basically do it all. Again, now if normally if he's in the 90s, 90s centers, 90s 7-footers, we can see right here. That on average centers were 6'11", power forward 6'9". So we've seen Anthony Davis play small forward, power forward, and center. All right. Now, when we say bigger, faster, and stronger, let's apply what he can do to what we normally see centers do, especially centers in the 90s. When we look at centers in the 90s, we don't know centers in the 90s unless your name is Hakeem Olajuwon. You didn't have a face-up game. You didn't have a handle. Usually, centers in the 90s had a back-to-the-basket game and just tried to power their way through people. It wasn't necessarily skill-based. It was all power, all right, and just bullying people. Anthony Davis has the speed and quickness to blow past any center in the 90s. He has the athleticism to score over inner center in the 90s. And again, he's not necessarily a center. He likes playing the power forward and small forward position. So again, if we put him at the small forward or power forward position in the 90s, he's going to be bigger, faster, and more elite than all small forwards in the 90s. All right. Now, could they guard him? Probably not. The man can do too much with the basketball. He can score at too many levels. He can score too many ways, as opposed to the 90s when players were really limited with the number of ways that they could actually score the ball. And again, this is no indictment on the 90s. This is just about being honest about what players in the 90s could or could not do. And that's not even to mention the fitness of the players in the 90s. You know, because in 2 Raw's video, he said that weightlifting takes away from your conditioning. Well, the problem with the 90s is those guys didn't condition and those guys did not weightlift either. This is why when players got out of shape, you did not see players get back in shape. Usually when players got out of shape, they just got more out of shape and they still were able to stay in the league. Come on, let's be honest about what bigger, faster, stronger actually means. Let's go to the next player. Kristaps Porzingis again. Now this man can play small forward, power forward, or center. This is a 7'3" wing. Kristaps Porzingis is a 7'3" wing. Now, if you look at some of the tallest players in the 90s, when we're talking about George Muresan, Manute Bol, Sean Bradley, these guys, unnaturally big, were only limited to playing right at the rim. Manute Bol was the only one that could shoot threes at the top of the key, and at the end of the day, he could barely get up and down the court. The same with Sean Bradley, the same with George Muresan, the same with a lot of these players that were unnaturally big in the 90s. All right, could they stay? You know, if we matched up George Muresan with the Kristaps Porzingis, how do you really think that matchup would go? Kristaps Porzingis is faster and stronger. He plays unnatural for the center position. And see, a lot of 90s fans, they want Kristaps Porzingis to not use all of his offensive gifts. This man has all of the athleticism, all of these offensive gifts. They want him to go play traditional basketball, go post up on the block with your back to the basket, just like they did in the 90s, because you're 7'3". When, again, if you had an understanding of the game of basketball, you would know that the back to the basket game, it has essentially been nullified by the implementation of the matchup zone, the man-to-man matchup zone, where every post touch, if you're playing back to the basket, every post touch is going to lead to a double team, and you're going to have to try to score over 2 people every time you touch the ball. And it's turning 7-footers into playmakers. Right? This is why we have more great passing bigs in this particular era, because they have to develop that skill set. Because if they do catch the ball back to the basket, they have to be ready to either score quickly. So that means you have to be quick, you have to be agile, you have to have foot speed. And if you don't have that, you have to be like a Marc Gasol, where you have to have excellent court vision, excellent basketball IQ, and an excellent ability to pass the ball to the weak side of the court. That's what you have to do in this game today. So it's not as simple as just saying go to the blow block because you're 7 feet tall. The game is different. The game is played different. Teams scheme differently against that. And because the game has evolved, because defenses have evolved to nullify guys that like to go to the low post because of their height, because teams have found a way to nullify the effectiveness of that style of basketball, now they're going into a more spread style of basketball where bigs are coming out like Kristaps Porzingis, like Anthony Davis, like Giannis, and they're running high ball screens with guards, and then they're attacking the paint with their speed to catch lobs or catch passes where they can score on the interior. So again, it's the same. The principles are the same. The game just has to be played differently because the game evolves. And unfortunately for 90s fans fail to understand that the game simply has evolved. And the game, because the game has evolved, we see players like Kristaps Porzingis be more athletic, agile, and better with regards to all-around skills than we saw we can only name one center in the 90s who has the skill set of Kristaps Porzingis, who has the handle, who has the foot speed, who has the quickness, who has the athleticism. That's Hakeem Olajuwon. In this particular era, I've already given you three 7-footers: Giannis, KD, and we got Porzingis right here. These are superstar level players in this league who are all 7 feet tall, and they don't even have to play their natural position of center because they're so skilled. They can create matchup nightmares on other places on the court. So again, when you're dealing with 7-footers, if you have a 7-footer with the ability and skill to go play shooting guard, I'm definitely going to let him play shooting guard, and I'll put a more traditional center in the post because it gives me more height on the court. It gives me more flexibility, and it creates more matchup problems. Come on, man. We got to be honest. That's what bigger, faster, stronger actually is. All right. So let's not listen to these false, fake definitions that guys like Turaw want to give you. Again, that's because you get all your information off Google. All right, and you don't know the game of basketball. We're gonna go next up. Next up, we got a guy like Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons is 6'10". Now in the 90s, if you're 6'10", you're gonna be power forward. All right. When we look at power forwards in the 90s, we got guys like Oliver Miller. Oliver Miller was 6'9", 280, one of the biggest players we ever saw in the NBA. What could Oliver Miller could only play the center position. He could only play the power forward position. Why? Because he was too big and he was too slow to play anywhere else on the court. That's why. He did not have a handle. He did not have the offensive game that Ben Simmons does. Even when we talk about the greats, if we talk about the greats, guys like Karl Malone, one of the greatest power forwards of the 90s. He didn't have all of the gifts. He didn't have the athleticism. He didn't have the agility that Ben Simmons does. But again, Ben Simmons in this era, because of his skill set, he's able to play what position? Point guard. Now, if Ben Simmons plays point guard in the 90s, why would he dominate? He would dominate because, again, the three-point shot was not as relevant, and he's extremely great at attacking the basket and finishing at the basket. So in the 90s, imagine having a 6'10" point guard with the ability to slash and attack the way Ben Simmons does. This man would dominate the 90s. He's already a physical player. He loves to play physical. All right. He's a great defender. And again, he just gives you more length on the court. So this is what we mean by bigger, faster, stronger, because with his size and skill as compared to those tiny guards of the 90s, and we look at the Hardaways, John Stockton, Gary Payton, what could these little guards honestly do in that type of era where the three-point shot was essentially irrelevant? And you have a guy like Ben Simmons playing the point guard at 6'10", who can attack the basket relentlessly. These guys couldn't do nothing with a player like Ben Simmons. The game is played different. So, again, when we say bigger, faster, and stronger, make sure that you correlate it to the position. How many 6'10" point guards did you find in the 90s? Again, the closest that we had was Magic Johnson, and he only played 1 year in the 90s. Other than that, the average point guard, the average height of point guards in the 90s was 6'1". This is what we mean by bigger, faster, stronger. Ben Simmons is bigger, faster, and stronger than most guards. Even if we compare Ben Simmons to John Stockton, who's bigger? Ben Simmons. Who's faster? Ben Simmons. Who's stronger? Ben Simmons. That's the definition of bigger, faster, stronger, because we're comparing per position. Ben Simmons as a point guard to one of the greatest point guards of the 90s, John Stockton. Even if we compared Gary Payton, right? Let's compare. Like we can compare Rod Strickland. We can compare Tim Hardaway Jr. Who's bigger, faster, and stronger? This man would be, and he's not even one of the biggest superstars of this league. Come on, man. Let's stop acting like we don't know what bigger, faster, stronger actually means. This is what bigger, faster, stronger actually means. All right, now next up, we got Zion Williamson. We already know this guy's a Mack truck. Now, when you talk about athletic phenomenon, this guy's an athletic phenomenon right here. This guy at his when we look at Oliver Miller was 6'9", 280, about the same as Zion Williamson. Derek Coleman, 6'10", 250, similar build to Zion Williamson. Karl Malone, 6'9", 260, similar build to Zion Williamson. But when we talk about being faster and stronger, who's faster and stronger? Zion has unnatural speed at his weight and size. All right. So as compared to the 90s, he has the speed to blow past most guards and shooting guards in the 90s. All right. He has the strength to dominate inside against most bigs in the 90s. All right. And he's bigger at his position. He's bigger than a lot of players at that position in the 90s. And again, if we talk about athleticism, he's definitely more athletic than any power forward, than in the 90s. And that's even comparing him to Shawn Kemp. He's just as athletic or more athletic than Shawn Kemp. And Shawn Kemp's probably the only player that we could put on that list that can compare to Zion with regards to athleticism. But as we saw with Shawn Kemp, what happened with Shawn Kemp in his career? He got out of shape. And because players in the 90s didn't take fitness, conditioning, or even weightlifting seriously, once you get out of shape in the 90s, you're going to stay out of shape. All right. And usually you're going to end your career as a overweight center who eventually starts chucking up three-pointers. Again, that's common across the board with Derek Coleman, Tom Gugliotta, Oliver Miller, Charles Barkley. All of these guys, what did they do in their career? They got fatter and they got slower. And their games just simply eroded away because they lacked any fitness, conditioning, or weightlifting. Next up, we got a guy like Brandon Ingram, small forward. All right, so we got a guy, a 6'10", another 6'10" small forward, Brandon Ingram. Again, now he's more a slight frame, but when you're talking about being bigger and faster, he's going to be faster and taller than every small forward of the 90s. You didn't have small forwards in the 90s who were 6'10". Typically, you were 6'10", 6'9", 6'10", 6'11", or 7 foot. In the 90s, you were a center. And you primarily put at that center spot because players 6'9" and up were usually extremely slow in the 90s. And that's just, again, that's about being honest. Now, what 90s fans will do is they'll try to say Dominique Wilkins, or they'll try to say Charles Barkley. They'll use the few anomalies, but across the board, when you're being honest about it, across the board, power forwards and centers in the 90s were slow. Power forwards and centers in the 90s were out of shape. Power forwards and centers in the 90s were overweight. That's the facts of the matter. So when we compare his position, if you put him up against small forwards in the 90s, he would essentially be able to dominate primarily because of his height. All right, primarily because of his height. The man is just as fast as any small forward. All right, the man can get his shot off at any time. He plays like a guard. This man could dominate ones, twos, and threes in the 90s with no problem because of his height and speed. Come on, man. That's what bigger, faster, stronger means. And again, he's just an all-star in this particular area. He's not even listed as a superstar. All right, we got Karl Anthony Towns. This is another guy who can play power forward and center. All right, what has Karl Anthony Towns done with his game? Because he understands the back-to-the-basket game in the NBA is dead. Because of the man-to-man matchup zone, he likes to attack from the outside in. This is how bigs have to change their game according to how teams will guard you. So, for all you basketball dummies, especially you 90s fans who keep saying that guys don't want to go bang in the post, you know why guys don't go bang in the post? Because of the man-to-man matchup zone. All right? That's why. It makes no sense to go bang in the post because why? You're going to be getting trapped. You're going to turn the ball over more. You're going to get trapped. All right. And then 9 times out of 10 in this particular era, you're probably especially in the 90s, you're probably going to be sending a center to the free throw line who can't shoot free throws. So even if they do get fouled, so now you're dealing with 3 problems right there. This is why the traditional back to the basket game is becoming more and more relevant, and this is why the centers and power forwards are trying to develop alternative skills, such as being able to shoot consistently, being able to hit the corner 3, being able to make free throws consistently, being able to take people off the dribble and face up. They have to do these things because of how defenses have evolved. So you 90s fans out there that act as if defense is non-existent in this era. No, defense is not non-existent. One, there's no hand checking, so you can't grab guys. All right, this is what you can do in the 90s. You could grab guys because, again, when you grab guys, when you hand check, you're usually hand checking because the guy in front of you is much faster than you and you can't guard him. This is why you hand check. Man, just more basketball lessons. Another player right here. We got Siakam right here. Siakam right here is another 6'9" guy. Another 6'9". At 6'9" in the 90s, this man will be stuck at power forward. But in this era, because of his versatility, they can put him at shooting guard or small forward. And if they wanted to go bigger, they could put him. They can even put him at power forward or center if they wanted to go with a small ball lineup. And we know that a 6'9" center is perfectly fine because the Phoenix Suns play Oliver Miller at 6'9" at center sometimes. Was that considered a small ball lineup, or was it not considered a small ball lineup because Oliver Miller was out of shape and 300 pounds and he just looked like a big interior force? Come on, man. Let's be realistic about it. All right, bigger, faster, and stronger. That's what we mean. Compared to his position, if you put this man in the 90s at the shooting guard or small forward position, because of his size, speed, and the ability to score all over the court, he will be able to dominate. Let's stop acting like these guys would just be pushovers in the 90s. No, they would be matchup nightmares for guys in the 90s because seeing a player at this type of size on the perimeter doing the things that he was able to do was not common in the 90s, and teams would not know how to guard it. All right, next up, and then the last one. This is one, and aside from injury, prior to injuries, Blake Griffin just was one of those athletic freaks of nature at 6'9". At 6'9", the man had a face-up game. He had a handle. He started to develop a jump shot. He could push the ball up the court, similar to what a point forward does. He could play center if they wanted to go to a small ball lineup at 6'9", 6'10". All right. This is one of the reasons why the Clippers along with him and DeAndre Jordan, were one of the most elite teams in the NBA. It was extremely hard to guard. And it wasn't hard to guard simply because they were tall. It was because of their versatility that they had with that height. They were bigger than most. They could play a guy like Blake Griffin at the small forward or power forward position and create additional matchup problems. That's why. This is what we mean by bigger, faster, and stronger. And I haven't even ran down the list of all the players that I could even speak on. We could speak on guys like Trae Young and with his speed and quickness and strength. When you're able to shoot the ball at the range that Trae Young does, that's strength consistently. Look at his speed. All right, same with Steph Curry. Okay, you can say that Steph Curry's small. You can say that Steph Curry's slight or small. At the end of the day, the man has strength and speed, more so than a lot of those guys in the 90s, because he can shoot the ball with range from anywhere on the court at a consistent clip. All right, and he's one of the fastest guards in the league. And it's easy to say he's not fast when you compare him to a lot. When you see him play in this particular era, when all of the guards are extremely fast, well, it's hard to say that he's one of the fastest guards in the league. Drop him in the 90s, and we'll see him run circles around those guards in the 90s. And again, we haven't even talked about Donovan Mitchell. We got Aaron Gordon and Zach LaVine. Matchup nightmares, gifted with their size and strength and speed. Derrick Jones Jr., Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Russell Westbrook. The list can go on and on and on. And then we didn't even mention one of the greatest of this era with Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard at just 6'7". The man, Kawhi Leonard is 6'7" with a 7'3" wingspan. He's 6'7" with the wingspan of somebody who's 7'3". Do you know the type of damage that with his mid-range game? Do you know the type of damage he could do offensively and defensively in the 90s? You know, if you add a player like that and you give him to Phil Jackson, with what Phil Jackson was able to do defensively with the Bulls, the man has a 7'3" wingspan. We weren't seeing that in the 90s. And the closest thing we saw to that in the 90s was Danny Manning. But what was Danny Manning? He was frail. He was injured all the time. Again, what's the constant theme in the 90s? Injuries. No fitness. Look at Danny Manning. The man had no muscle mass whatsoever. Come on, man. Let's stop acting like we don't know the real definition of bigger, faster, stronger. It correlates to your position. It's not about the average height of all players in the NBA, as Too Raw for TV would try to lead you to believe. That's completely false. That's fictional. That's a fake narrative, because what are they trying to do again? They're trying to find a way to keep their era alive. They don't want to admit that the game has evolved, that players at every position are now bigger, faster, stronger. It's much more hard to guard in NBA because what you can't hand check. You got people. You need to understand. Hand checking is something that's done in street ball. Hand checking is usually done by older players who can't stay in front of younger players. That's not a skill set. Being able to hand check is not a skill. Anybody can hand check. It takes a basket. You don't have to have any basketball IQ to hand check. So those people out there who act like hand checking was this great thing to have in the game, there's a reason why it was removed from the game. Because what was happening? Guys would essentially just hold guards down. You're essentially fouling them the whole time they're dribbling the ball, and refs aren't calling it. So now that that's been removed from the game, now you have to have the foot speed. Now you have to have quickness. Now you have to have fitness and conditioning so that you can stay with the man that's in front of you. As opposed to the 90s, when you can come into the league 100 pounds overweight, like Sean Kemp, like Charles Barkley, like Derek Coleman, like some of these guys, you can come into the league overweight and you can still guard people and be effective in the league. That just won't happen in this league. You know, we look at the Laker team. We see Deion Waiters come in 15 to 20 pounds overweight, and he can't stay in front of anybody. He can't stay in front of anybody. So imagine coming in, as we saw some of these power forwards and small forwards and centers did back in the 90s, when you're coming in 50 and 60 pounds overweight, but you're still able to compete at a high level. Come on, man. Let's be realistic about bigger, faster, and stronger. Let's not allow people to come with this fake narrative. And again, this only stems from, this only stems from people who have low basketball IQ, who don't necessarily understand the game or the terminology that's used. Again, bigger, faster, stronger does not mean the average height of all players across the board, because as you can see from this list, the average player of all height across the board in NBA is essentially the same. All right, but when we look at some of the best players of this league, they're unnatural freaks in nature who are playing at a position that pose matchup nightmares. That's the definition of bigger, faster, stronger. All right, they've been another great video, man. I love to debunk people, man. I love to debunk these false narratives, especially 90s fans who trying to hold on to that era. Again, we heard Too Raw try to discredit players of this era for lifting weights. You know. That only comes from somebody who's never lifted weights. Lifting weights helps, because again, lifting weights is not all about gaining muscle mass. You know, if we're going low weight, high rep, now we're building twitch fiber. Now we're getting big. Now we're getting bigger, faster, and stronger when we're working on our twitch fiber. Come on, man. Let's be realistic about these things. Let's not allow these 90s guys to push lies and myths around simply because they don't want to give up on that era. Again, at the end of the day, the game has evolved. There were some great players in the 90s. There were legends in the 90s, and we won't forget them. But we just simply need to come to terms with the fact that this particular era of basketball, we're dealing with more and more elite players across the board coming into this league. And we know that there's more and more elite talent in the NBA because it's harder and harder to find jobs, not just in the NBA, but even overseas. Overseas is saturated with a lot of great players who could easily be playing in the NBA. All right. Why are these players not getting picked up by the NBA? Because there's so much talent. All right. And guys are not trying to wait around and deal with the politics of the NBA. They're just going to go overseas and collect a check. That's the only smart thing to do, especially with some of these players who got kids they got to feed. I'm not going to wait around on the NBA. I can go overseas, make $100,000 a year, $200,000 a year, and I'll be fine. There's nothing wrong with that. So again, let's be realistic. So again, the greatness, the depth and eliteness of the NBA is even affecting the overseas market. Now you got hundreds, if not thousands, of guys overseas that could easily play in the NBA. In the 90s, we couldn't say that. How many guys were going overseas to play in the 90s? We didn't even respect. The only reason, there's a reason why a lot of these overseas teams will only allow 2 American players. You know why? Because there's so much talent here in America. And if those overseas teams started loading up their teams, if one of the teams that just had a lot of money just decided to fill up their roster with 9 to 10 American guys who just got overlooked or bumped out of the NBA, then they would have a team that could dominate overseas for the next 10, 15 years. So this is why you have those limits. All right? This is why overseas teams love players who got dual citizenship. One of my best friends has a dual citizenship from Africa. Played basketball in New York. One of the best players, college players, street ball players that I've seen. He just got signed overseas as an African citizen because now that's another U.S. player you can have on your roster. But he signed on as an African player. They can have 2 more U.S. players paired up with them. That's the value of just having U.S. players on your team. So, again, there's politics into this when you're talking about players in the NBA or players who are right outside the NBA or just didn't make it. There's a lot of politics involved. There, again, if you're not into this game, right, if you don't understand the inner workings of some of this stuff, then you'll end up saying stuff like what Too Raw just said. All right. And again, at the end of the day, that's why I'm here with FYF Sports, man. If you say silly stuff like that, I'm going to systematically debunk you again. And when I debunk you, there is no coming back. There's no video that Too Raw can make to rebuttal this. You cannot rebuttal these facts. All right. You cannot rebuttal the fact that players in the 90s were out of shape and slow. You can't go back and rebuttal that. You can't rebuttal the fact that even players in the 90s have admitted that they didn't want to touch the weight room or never did touch the weight room. Come on, man. Let's stick with the facts and just accept the game has evolved and there's just more talent in the league than ever before. FYF Sports, man, another great video. I appreciate you guys for sticking around. Went on a little bit longer than I would have hoped, but again, I had to get this information out there for you guys. Again, 90s fans, again, for whatever reason, they're starting to just mislead people with misinformation. I'm just here to set the record straight. But FYF Sports, man, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and we'll be back with another video soon. FYF Sports, we out.
Police about to read them rights. I don't wanna go to jail, man. Might not get no bail, man. Gangsta think you tough until them rollers pull them cuffs. Okay, now we call you bluff. You just be talking all that stuff. Oh, you a big dog, huh? Cut it out, we're not even close. I don't wanna go to jail, man. I'm broke, can't get no bail, man.
Oh man, hey, that's enough for LB for the day, man.